o Senhor Presidente.
Muito bom dia.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to formally open the session.
E passamos de imediato ao...
With no further ado, I'd like to move on to point 1 of our agenda today. Statements from the Council and the Commission on the crisis of the rule of law in Poland and the primacy of EU law. I'd like to begin by giving the floor to the Minister for Foreign Affairs, André Loger, on behalf of the European Council, please. Thank you.
Madam President, Prime Minister, honourable members, thank you for organising this debate. Respect for the rule of law is critical to guarantee well-functioning of the Union. The European Union is a union of law, and the primacy of EU law is the foundation of it. In EU architecture, primacy of EU law is the way to guarantee the equality of member states before the treaties and to ensure that all Union citizens enjoy the same rights. Without primacy, the application of EU law would vary from one member to another. This would destroy the level playing field in the single market. It is also a precondition for daily interaction and for smoothly resolving disputes. It is, ultimately, the basis for our living together in a common European home. The Presidency is committed to bringing forward exchanges in a positive and constructive atmosphere on rule of law and related issues. Today, at the General Affairs Council, in the framework of the annual Rule of Law Dialogue, Ministers will be discussing developments in the area of rule of law in a general horizontal debate. The Commission's 2021 Rule of Law report feeds into this exercise, and the primacy of EU law is among the topics covered in the report. The General Affairs Council will discuss again rule of law issues at its session on 23rd November. A country-specific discussion will cover developments in 5 main member states, namely Croatia, Cyprus, Italy, Latvia and Lithuania. The Council also remains seized on the Article 7 TU procedure. The Presidency is committed to advancing these proceedings in a Council in December. In addition, the Council continues to closely monitor the recent rule of law developments in Poland. We aspire for a constructive dialogue between the Commission and Poland, which would lead towards converging positions. We will also continue this discussion within the Council. I look forward to your intervention today, and also to hearing Prime Minister Morawiecki and how Poland sees the way forward. Thank you very much for your attention.
Muito obrigado, Sr.
Thank you very much, Minister. Now I'd like to give the floor to the European Commission, to the President of the Commission, and I'd like to welcome you and thank you for being here. Ursula von der Leyen, please.
Thank you, President Silva Pereira. dear Prime Minister Morawiecki, dear Minister Logar, honorable members. Almost 40 years ago, in December 1981, the communist regime in Poland imposed martial law. Many members of Solidarność, the independent trade union and of other groups, were put in jail simply because they stood up for their rights. The people of Poland wanted democracy, like millions of other Europeans from Budapest to Tallinn to East Berlin. They wanted the freedom to choose their government. They wanted free speech and free media. They wanted an end to corruption. And they wanted independent courts to protect their rights. The people of Central and Eastern Europe wanted to join the European family of free people, a strong community of values and democracy. Because that's what Europe is about, and that is what Europe stands for. And honorable members, the recent ruling of the Polish Constitutional Court puts much of it into question. We have been concerned about the independence of the judiciary for some time. Judges have seen their immunity being lifted and have been driven out of office without justification. And this threatens judicial independence, which is a basic pillar of the rule of law. We have taken a number of measures. We continue to have a regular dialogue, but unfortunately the situation has worsened. And this is not only the Commission's opinion, this is what has been confirmed by the European Court of Justice and the European Court of Human Rights. And now this has culminated in the most recent ruling of the Polish Constitutional Court. Honourable members, the European Commission is, at the moment, carefully assessing this judgment. But I can already tell you today, I am deeply concerned. This ruling calls into question the foundations of the European Union. It is a direct challenge to the unity of the European legal order. Only a common legal order provides equal rights, legal certainty, mutual trust between member states, and therefore common policies. This is the first time ever that a court of a member state finds that the EU treaties are incompatible with the national constitution. And this has serious consequences for the Polish people, because the ruling has a direct impact on the protection of the judiciary. The ruling undermines the protection of the judicial independence as guaranteed by Article 19 of the treaty and as interpreted by the European Court of Justice. Without independent courts, people have less protection and consequently their rights are at stake. And honourable members, Polish people must be able to rely on fair and equal treatment in the judicial system, just like any other European citizen. In our union, we all enjoy the same rights, and this basic principle fundamentally impacts people's lives. Because if European law is applied differently in Grenoble or Göttingen or Gdansk, EU citizens would not be able to rely on the same rights everywhere. Honourable members, when joining the European Union, the Polish people put their trust in the European Union. They expected the European Union to defend their rights, and rightly so. The Commission is the guardian of the treaty. It is my Commission's duty to protect the rights of EU citizens wherever they live in our union. The rule of law is the glue that binds our union together. It is the foundation of our unity. It is essential for the protection of the values on which our union is founded: democracy, freedom, equality, and respect for human rights. And this is what all 27 member states have signed up to as part of this union, as sovereign countries and free people. Honourable members, we cannot and we will not allow our common values to be put at risk. The Commission will act, and the options are all known. First option, infringements, where we legally challenge the judgment of the Polish Constitutional Court. Another option is the conditionality mechanism and other financial tools. The Polish government has to explain to us how it intends to protect European money given this ruling of their Constitutional Court. Because in the coming years, we will be investing 2,100 billion euros with a multi-annual budget and the Next Generation EU Recovery Programme. This is European taxpayers' money. And if our union is investing more than ever to advance our collective recovery, we must protect the union's budget against breaches of the rule of law. The third option is the Article 7 procedure. This is the powerful tool in the treaty, and we must come back to it, because let me remind you, the Polish Constitutional Court that today has cast doubts on the validity of our treaty is the same court that under Article 7 we consider not to be independent and legitimate. And this, in many ways, comes full circle. Honourable members, I deeply regret that we find ourselves in this situation. I've always been a proponent of dialogue, and I will always be. This is a situation that can and must be resolved. And we want a strong Poland in a united Europe. We want Poland to be at the heart of our debates in building a common future. Poland has a stake in Europe. Together we can build a Europe that is strong and confident in a world where other big powers become more and more assertive. Europe has benefited from Poland's unique experience so much. Without the people of Poland, our European journey would have been very different. When Karol Wojtyła, as Pope John Paul II, went to his homeland, he changed European history forever. When Lech Wałęsa, with a scattered group of trade unionists, overcame a mighty army, we saw the beginning of the fall of the Iron Curtain. And when President Lech Kaczynski ratified the Lisbon Treaty, together with the Charter of Fundamental Rights, he reaffirmed Poland's commitment to our values. Polish people have played a fundamental role in making our union whole, in enabling their homeland to thrive as a vital part of our union, and they will always be. Polsko, jesteś i zawsze będziesz w sercu Europa. Niech jedzie Polska, niech jedzie Europa.
Polska zawsze jest i będzie
At the heart of Europe. Long live Poland and long live Europe. Thank you.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the President of the European Commission. Now, on behalf of the European Parliament, I'd like to welcome to the House of Democracy the Prime Minister of Poland, Mateusz Morawiecki. I'd like to give you the floor to speak today.
Panie Przewodniczący,
President, dear Commission President, ladies and gentlemen, I stand here today in front of you in the European Parliament to talk about a number of issues which are of key importance to the future of the EU, not only the future of Poland, but the future of our whole community. I will talk about the crises that we are facing now. I will talk about the standards and rules that should be the same for all of us and that often they are not the same. And then I will talk about principles based on which no public organ can take any action outside of any competences granted to it. Then I will talk about the verdict of the Polish Constitutional Tribunal, what this verdict means to Poland and the EU, and I will talk about how diversity and mutual respect how they are important to all of us. Then I will talk about constitutional pluralism, and then I will talk about risks which can derive from verdicts of constitutional courts in Europe. Then I will talk about our future. Now let me start from the most basic thing, which is challenges that we now have in front of us. Inflation, rising costs, outside threats, exploding public debt, illegal migration, energy crisis. All of these translate into public unrest, and they just expand the already long catalogue of problems that we have on our hands. I think for the first time since the war, we have a question to answer. Can we guarantee a better future to our citizens? Now, the Mediterranean has become a tragic area due to the migration problem. In the east, we have an aggressive policy by the Russian Federation. Russia starts even wars to threaten our friends. Also, we have a very serious energy crisis on our hands, rising prices of energy, also caused by activity by Russian energy providers. The scale of the crisis can shake the very foundations of Europe in the weeks to come. Millions of companies may go bankrupt, and the gas crisis may drive tens of millions of EU citizens into poverty. Now, one crisis can have a domino effect in other areas. We cannot deal with such problems on our own. We must act together. I consider all of these problems, however, to be our problems, not only Polish problems. And now I will talk about the Polish contribution to our shared European project. EU integration is our choice. This is our destiny. Europe is our place. We do not want to go anywhere else. We want Europe to be strong and courageous. We are not looking at short-term benefits, we also keep thinking about what we can give to Europe. Poland has been deriving great benefits from economic integration. Also, technology transfers, financial transfers are of key importance, but Poland did not join the EU empty-handed. Poland's accession gave great commercial opportunities to German, French and other companies. Entrepreneurs and companies from those countries have really benefited from Poland's membership. For instance, I'm talking about transfers of dividends and benefits from poorer Central European countries like Poland to richer Western European countries. But we want Poland's membership to be a win-win situation for all. We want to participate in post-pandemic energy transformation, economic transformation. We want such answers to these questions to be adequate. We don't want our citizens to be left to fend for themselves. So in such areas, we have always spoken with the same voice as the EU Parliament, for instance. Therefore, Poland, Germany, the Czech Republic, we have been promoting such solutions which will boost the competitivity of EU economy. We want to defend four basic principles: the freedom of movement of goods, services, capital and people. We do not want to support, for instance, any tax havens. Some EU member states still maintain tax havens. Ladies and gentlemen, tax havens in the EU is the richest member states making even more money. How is this part of our EU values? I doubt this. Poland is in favor of a strong enlargement policy that would strengthen EU in the Western Balkan area. This will be completion of European integration. We want an EU which will have a strong foreign and defense policy fully reconcilable with our NATO membership. Now we are facing a cynical attack on our eastern border, and it is Poland now which guarantees EU's safety. Together with Lithuania and Latvia, we defend our external eastern border. We are strengthening the EU in a very traditional way. Now, I am here in front of you today, and I want to thank our forces and services from Poland, Lithuania, Latvia. I want to thank our officials who are defending our external border.
Bezpieczeństwo ma wiele wymiarów. Dziś, gdy
Security is a multi-dimensional phenomenon. Now we are seeing rising gas prices, and we realize what is the price to be paid for short-term energy policy. Now, allowing the building of a Nord Stream 2 pipeline and agreeing to Russia's policy in terms of energy, all of this has already translated into exploding energy prices. In Poland, the trust to the EU is still at the level of 58%. 58% of Polish citizens are saying Poland is and will remain an EU member state. Our government is part of this pro-European majority in Poland. Of course, this does not mean that Polish citizens are not feeling concern for the EU's future. This concern is well founded. I said how much Poland contributed to the EU, but still we keep hearing about first-class and second-class member states. And I will tell you why we must do away with this model. Now, what European citizens are expecting of us is to face the number of crises that we have on our hands. We must act together and not name and shame. We must not point fingers at those who can be easily blamed. Unfortunately, we see, or our citizens do see certain practices in the European institutions, and they keep asking themselves certain questions. Why there are different decisions and verdicts taken and issued regarding different member states of the EU? We see that the division between old and new, stronger and weaker, this division is strengthened and deepened. Pretending we have no problems in front of us, this is not good. Our citizens are not blind, they are not deaf. Unless we realize this, our institutions will lose more and more support. This process is already underway, dear ladies and gentlemen. Any policy must be based on principles, and the very foundation of the EU is the principle of democracy. Therefore, we must not remain silent when our country is being attacked, also in this room, in an unjust and impartial way, in a partial way.
Reguły gry muszą...
The rules of the game must be the same for all, and abiding by such rules of the game is an obligation to all of us. This is what the rule of law is about. It is unacceptable to expand competencies of institutions by way of fait accompli. You must not impose a decision or verdict without a legal basis. It is unacceptable to talk about financial penalties, etc. We had even worse language as relates to some member states. I reject the language of threats and fait accompli. I will not have EU politicians blackmail Poland. Blackmail must not be a method of policy conducted vis-à-vis a certain member state. We are a proud country. Poland is one of the countries with the longest history of statehood and democracy. In the 20th century, we fought for the freedom of Europe. In 1920, we defended Paris and Berlin against a Soviet attack. In 1939, we fought the Third Reich. And then in 1981, the Solidarity movement gave a new hope to fight with another totalitarian communist system. The post-war reconstruction of Europe was possible due to the contribution of many countries, but not all countries were able to benefit from that. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the rule of law. The rule of law is understood by many in different ways, but I think you will all agree that there will not be any rule of law without the division of powers, independence of courts, without respect for the principle that any institution has limited competence, and without respect for the hierarchy of the sources of law. EU law has primacy over national law within areas delegated by a member state. This principle is recognized in all member states, but the highest law in the EU is a constitution of a country. If a EU institution transgresses or infringes the delegated competences, then a member state must have tools to be able to react. The EU is a strong political and economic organism. It is the strongest, best developed international organization in history. But the EU is not a state. The We have 27 member states in Europe. Member states remain European sovereigns. They remain masters of treaties, and it is the member states who decide what the competences delegated to the EU are. In EU treaties, we delegated a lot of competences to the EU, but not everything. A number of areas remain within the competences of the member states. There is no doubt that EU law has primacy over national acts of law in those areas that were delegated by the member state to the EU. So similarly to other constitutional courts, the Polish Constitutional Court has asked the question whether it is the EU court that decides where the line of division is between EU competences and member states' competences. So if any new competences are to be granted to the EU, somebody has to decide whether they are reconcilable with national law. The Court of Justice seems to be deriving new competences for the EU. Otherwise, why would we have Article 4 of the treaty talking about respect for constitutional arrangements of member states? Why do we have Article 5 saying that the EU may only act within competences granted to it? These two articles would be null and void if it was only up to the Court of Justice to decide where the line of division is. Ladies and gentlemen, I do realize that the recent decision of the Polish Constitutional Court has become an object of a fundamental misunderstanding. If I were to hear that a constitutional court in another member state has cancelled or declared null and void EU treaties, I would be surprised, but I would try to check. So this is the reason of why I am here. I want to tell you what the bone of objection is. We should not be spreading further lies about Poland's Polexit or Poland leaving the EU, etc., etc. So I want to present you with some facts, some quotes. First of all, in our national legal system, the primacy of EU law does not extend to our constitutional system. So the principle of primacy of EU law must not threaten a member state's constitutional system. Third, our constitutional court can check for the principle of intra vires, to check whether EU's institutions have infringed upon their competences. As a result of such a decision, such ultra vires acts by the EU would not be applicable on the territory of the member state. Fourth, our constitution does not allow to delegate competences in a way which would result in the conclusion that Poland is no longer a sovereign country. I will skip further quotes in order to not waste too much time, but just two more. Poland's constitution is the highest Polish legal act as relates international agreements, also including agreements on delegating legal competences. And the last quote: delegating competences to the EU must not infringe upon the principle of primacy of Poland's constitution. I can see on your faces that you disagree with me. I don't understand why you disagree. These quotes that I quoted were quoted from the French Constitutional Tribunal, the German Federal Constitutional Court, the Danish Court, and I skipped the decisions of Italian and Spanish courts. And the quotes from the Polish Constitutional tribunal or court were from 2004-2005. So after Poland joined the EU. So what we are defending now, this doctrine has been clearly known for a number of years now. Now let me quote Professor Marek Safian. Based on our constitution now, we cannot conclude that there is primacy of EU law over Poland's constitution. Polish constitution is the highest legal act in Poland. We have expressis verbis, a clear rule laid down that there is primacy of EU law over Polish legal act, but not including the Polish constitution. I can quote a number of other examples from Lithuania, Romania and other countries. I can hear in the public debate that some of these verdicts that I have quoted related to other issues. Yes, it's true. Any specific verdict always relates to something different. But, for God's sake, there is one thing in common. It confirms that member states' constitutional courts recognize their own right to control. No more, no less. Control whether EU law is being executed, implemented within the competences that were granted to it. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have in the EU a number of countries without constitutional courts. We have those that have constitutional courts. We have countries where EU membership is inscribed in their constitutions. Some do not have such rules. We have countries where judges are elected by politicians. We have countries where judges are elected by other judges. So clearly there is a space for dialogue between us. Such dialogue is also being implemented by decisions by our judges. But we will never agree to have instructions or diktats issued to member states. This is not what EU is about. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a lot in common. We want to have more and more in common, but there are differences between us. If we are to cooperate, we must agree that such differences exist. The EU will not fall apart only because our legal systems will be different. We have been functioning like this for decades now. Maybe one day in the future we do agree to align our legal systems. But for that to happen, what is needed is a sovereign decision, sovereign decisions by sovereign member states. So now what we can do is we can agree to all attempts to limit the sovereignty of Poland. We can agree to the creeping expansion of the competences of the European Court of Law. What we are seeing now is a creeping revolution taking place by way of verdicts of the European Court of Justice. Or we can say no. If you want a supranational state in Europe, first, why don't you ask and get consent from all the sovereign member states? Let me repeat. The highest law of the Republic of Poland is the Constitution. It stands above any other sources of law. This principle will be defended by Polish Parliament and government. But let me stress that the Polish Constitutional Court has never declared that the stipulations of EU treaties are irreconcilable with the Polish law. On the contrary, Poland abides by EU treaties. The Polish tribunal stated that one specific interpretation of EU treaties is irreconcilable with the Polish constitution, resulting from the recent verdict by the Court of Justice. Now let me move on to another part of my speech. What risk can be derived from one judge questioning the verdict of other judge. So, according to the Strasbourg court, Polish judges would be required to agree that not only EU law has primacy over Polish acts of law, which is obvious, but also that they would need to act in infringement of Polish constitution, which would mean that millions of verdicts issued by Polish courts recently can be challenged in an arbitrary way. Millions of verdicts. This would be in clear breach of the principle of independence and stability of law. This principle is inscribed in the Polish constitution. Do you realize what such decisions can lead to? Do you want to have anarchy and lawlessness in Poland, really? The consequence of this would be a radical lowering of the standard of constitutional protection of Polish citizens. And we will not agree to this. No sovereign state will ever agree to this.
I'd like to ask you to conclude, please.
Zgoda na nią oznaczałoby, że Unia
Were we to agree to such a principle would mean that the EU ceases to be an association of sovereign states, and by way of fait accompli, the EU is transformed into a centrally governed European state where European institutions can force their so-called provinces to do as the central power wants. This is not what we agreed in the treaties. Definitely, we can talk about whether the EU has to change, whether we need a bigger budget, whether we need to spend more on defense. Poland is suggesting such a discussion. Maybe we should boost our resilience to outside hybrid shock, to cyber threats. Maybe we should better control investments into strategic sectors of our economy. How to better finance climate and energy transformation, how to make our decision-taking processes more effective, what to do in order to allow our citizens not to feel estranged from the EU. I have asked these questions because I think they will shape the future of the EU. We must discuss such issues. So now let me talk briefly about EU competences. Important decisions in the EU must not be taken by changes in the interpretation of
35 minutes, so I will use my time.
I cannot confirm that.
Success.
I cannot confirm that.
Sukces integracji europejskiej
I have to
polegał
ask
na
you to
tym.
conclude, please.
I'm coming to my end, but don't disturb me, please. Sukces integracji europejskiej.
The success of European integration was based on the fact that a law was a result of mechanisms that connected us in all the different areas. Now, trying to reverse this mechanism, trying to impose a law, is really questioning the mechanism that created the success of European integration. Now, we keep hearing about the deficit of democracy in Europe, but never before has this been so visible as over the last couple of years. More and more frequently, decisions are taken behind closed door by way of activism by European judges. More and more such decisions are taken without clear treaty bases, but by way of legal creativity, without any control. This phenomenon has been growing, and now we must say no, we must say stop. EU competences have clear boundaries. We must not remain silent when those boundaries are breached. So we are saying yes to European universalism, but we say no to European centralism.
Ja, tak jak każdy z Państwa na tej sali.
I, as any one of you present here, I submit to democratic control. I represent a government elected in 2015, a government which was given a chance to govern independently. Then in 2018, 19, 2020, Polish citizens evaluated in a democratic way how we work. We were given the strongest democratic mandate in our country. For 30 years in Poland, no other party received a similar result as Law and Justice, without support from abroad, without support from big business, without a quarter of the same media protection as our competitors. These lectures that we keep hearing, quite paternalistic, how we are to govern our country, that we are immature apparently, that our democracy is apparently young. This is a tragic narrative on the part of some friends in Europe. Poland has a long democratic history, solidarity, so penalties by strong, richer countries imposed on poorer countries who still are struggling with the heritage of the communism. This is not a good way for the future. Poland is respect EU law. Poland will not be intimidated, and we are expecting dialogue. For this dialogue to be possible, let me suggest some changes. We must have clear dialogue based on the principle of checks and balances. Why don't we have a chamber in the Court of Justice, including judges from European constitutional courts? This is my suggestion now. The final decision will be taken by our citizens, but our courts should have at their disposal a mechanism to seek cooperation and solutions to our problems. Now, to conclude, let me ask you, what are the sources of the strength of our civilization? History gives us the following answer. We became powerful because we were the most diverse continent in the world. Niall Ferguson writes, political empires of the East stifled innovation, but in mountainous Western Eurasia, monarchies and state competed against one another and communicated with another. Europe.
To my two last paragraphs, Chairman. Europa wygrała, więc...
Europe emerged victorious because it maintained a balance between competition and cooperation. And now we again need both of these things. Ladies and gentlemen, I want a powerful, great Europe fighting for equal opportunities. I want a Europe which can resist authoritarian regimes, a Europe that respects the cultures and traditions from which it emerged. I want a Europe that clearly sees the challenges of the future, that works on solutions that will be best for the whole world. This is a great challenge on our hands now. Dear friends, only in this way will we be able to give EU citizens a new hope, a will to live, to fight, to be successful. This is a great challenge. Let's take it on together. Long live Poland, long live Europe, the best place under the sun. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Prime Minister. You will take note that I was extremely flexible regarding the allocated time, so that nobody can say that you didn't have time enough to give explanations to the European Parliament. But the respect of the allocated time is also a way of showing respect for this house of the European democracy. And now we go on with the interventions by the political groups, beginning with Manfred Weber from the EPP. You've got the floor.
Sehr geehrter Herr Präsident, sehr geehrte Frau
President of the Commission, Prime Minister. First of all, we need to be clear about what we are discussing here today. We are not talking about the country of Poland, the citizens of Poland who have battled for freedom on many occasions in their past. We see the economic success of the last 30 years in Poland, which is breathtaking. Poland is a proud people which has taken its rightful place in the family of European nations, and we welcome them, and we are glad that we can live together as part of Europe. So it is not about the Poles, it is not about the country, it's about Polish policy as implemented by the government. So let us be factual. Europe is not a state. Europe is a community of states, and we have undertaken shared commitments which regulate the way our community works. We need to play by the rules. The constitutions of the member states, yes, are fundamental, but the way this community works is even more important. Let me explain this. My country signed the Maastricht Treaty and therefore had to change its constitution in order to render it compatible with the new legal framework in Europe. We therefore require that prospective member states such as North Macedonia also change its constitutional structures so that it can become a member of the European Union. This has been our consistent policy. Yes, constitutions are fundamental and define the way we interact and live together, but the rules of our community take precedence and are more important still than constitutions. The constitution in the shape of the Lisbon Treaty was adopted some 12 or 13 years ago when Kaczynski was in power. He was one of your party colleagues. And the Poles then were prepared to accept the rules. But now we have got to look at the question of justice, and we've got to look at how we can work together for a better future. Yes, we have debates in Germany, in the Czech Republic, in France, which you've rightly alluded to. You've said that these constitutional courts have also submitted questions. Yes, justice and dispensation of justice should be a living thing. But what is specific about this Polish case is that the independence of the Supreme Court is at question, and there are many legal experts who have said that the independence is clearly under question, and this is the question which we are focusing on centrally here today. I'd like to thank the many Poles who took to the streets recently and showed that yes, there is another Poland. Hundreds of thousands of Poles took to the streets in Warsaw and many other cities, and I'd like to thank them. I'd like to thank Donald Tusk, who was instrumental in organizing this demonstration. The genuine patriots were out in the street with the Polish flags, proud of these flags and proud of the European flags they held in the other hand. A patriot is not a nationalist and must not be a nationalist. He should be, if a genuine patriot, a convinced European. And therefore, ladies and gentlemen, when we look at what the people in the street perceive of this debate, we can see that they are very much perceiving that there is an impact. They are demonstrating against Polexit. They don't want to see it. If you reject the supremacy of the rulings of the European Court, then you are rejecting implicitly the independence of the judiciary. Donald Tusk is right, saying that the ruling has got to be revised, because otherwise it is going to lead to major problems, and the Poles can't understand and see this. They have perceived it very clearly. I'd like to say, whilst we have this opportunity, Prime Minister Morawiecki, that we are not differentiating between good and bad Europeans, between longer standing and newer Europeans, but I do look around and I see the people from all the different groups, and I remember the Tories who have said and done many things in the past which have undermined Europe. And we have seen, for example, the AfD saying that far too much money is going to Bucharest and is going to Poland. So all around the EU there are different perceptions, and it was many of your supporters who were not keen that Europe should welcome Poland as a prospective and now very real strong member of the European Union, and therefore you need to pay closer attention to what is going on in the streets, in the cities and towns of your country. There are many things that we need to realise about this discussion today. There are many people who like to see division in the EU. There are those who want to see a weaker EU. There are those who question the primacy of the Constitution and the constitutional state founded in the rule of law. And I say to you, Prime Minister, that you're actually sowing discord in the European Union with this speech you've given here today. You are making Europe weaker, and there are those who will welcome this, above all, Vladimir Putin. Your policies simply play into the hands of our opponents and people such as Vladimir Putin, who has a vested interest in generating a divided Europe with the seeds of discord to be seen everywhere. So please stop this. Please stop this. We're discussing questions such as infringements and the rule of law proceedings in the Court of Justice. I would like to thank the Commission, and I'd like to ask whether, in fact, in the Council we shouldn't be considering a rule of law Article 7 infringement proceeding, because every time the Council meets they fail to impose a decision on the basis of Article 7, and this silence which is emanating from the Council is crippling Europe. We need clarity from the Council so that all the countries which are founded on the constitutions and the rule of law in Europe can finally see a just solution to this. Thank you.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you very much. The next speaker for the Socialist Group, Irache García Pérez, please.
Gracias.
Thank you, Mr. President. President von der Leyen, Prime Minister Morawiecki. It's important to hold this debate today. We have shown parliamentary respect listening to your intervention, and I'm sure you would do the same to us now, listening to the MEPs of this House and what we have to say to you. Allow me to begin by reaffirming one point. We are fully aware of the importance of votes. Those of us in this House are here because we represent the citizens who, with their vote, have trusted in us. Allow me to remind you of one thing that you as a Democrat should know. This is, votes do not give legitimacy to drift away from democracy. We need to hold this debate. We need to do it for the good of the European Union and for the good of Poland, because the ruling of the so-called Constitutional Court has created an unprecedented crisis. It's something I feel very sorry about. I deeply regret, especially for those millions of Poles who want to be part of the European Union and now don't know what will happen with their future. You say that you don't want a poll exit. Let me be clear, my political group doesn't want that either. But this is the EU's a serious organisation based on legal certainty. Unlike dictatorships or absolute monarchies, the European Union is based on law. The law is the same for everyone, and it guarantees peace because it's fair, predictable, and because it's complied with. You're asking for respect for diversity. We need to have more. This is the wealth of our union. But what makes it possible to decide amongst all of us, to come to agreements amongst all of us, are rules which guarantee the equality for all. That's why someone threatens not to respect those rules. They walk towards the door on their own. No one is pushing you towards the door. But let me say that I think we are missing the focus with this debate. When you and the PIS party set this out as a confrontation between Polish and European sovereignty, so you have not understood what the EU is. 70 years ago, the founding fathers understood that in an interdependent world, the best way of exercising sovereignty in certain areas was by sharing it. Together we can better solve problems. Together we are stronger. We come here voluntarily because we trust in each other, because we believe in a common future. We are not obliged to come here. No one is stealing anything from us by being part of the EU. But to share that sovereignty, there has to be some basic principles which are a given: the separation of powers, independence of the judiciary, respect for freedom of the press. And I think that's where the problem is, that governments such as yours have taken a path towards totalitarianism and regression. That's why your problem isn't with the European legal order, it's with the principles of democracy and the rule of law, and that's even more concerning. You don't like the fact that the EU institutions are telling you this. I'm sorry, but we cannot remain silent because we are loyal to the European project. The Commission is obliged to act with those instruments that it has. We've run out of time. The Commission is the guardian of the treaties, because when we accept that we lose trust, then we stop being partners and we become competitors. This Parliament cannot remain silent, because this is the house of European democracy, and here we reflect what the Polish citizens also want. We've listened to what the streets in Poland are asking for. They want support. They're asking for the same thing as the judges and the prosecutors in your country. There's one good thing that comes from all of this. Beyond laws and beyond economic plans, the European Union is a family. And that is something that we're seeing in the streets of Poland today. Poland is much more than the PIS, as Hungary is much more than Orban, and as Slovenia is more than Janša. The citizens of these countries are suffering from the authoritarian drift of your country. Trust in the European Union. We will be their voice. We will support them. We will not leave them behind. Nor will we leave behind Polish women. We'll continue to work with them to ensure their rights and that no one speaks on behalf. We are together in this. A few weeks ago, I was in Warsaw, and I felt the warmth of so many people who trust in Europe. We will not let them down. We want to. I also am aware of the fact that what these people think. We know that we will continue with dialogue, and we will always listen to you, Mr. Morawiecki. We will listen to you with respect, but you also need to listen to the vast majority of Europeans who want to work together.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you very much. The next speaker from the Renew Europe group, Malik Asmani, please.
President von der Leyen, Prime Minister, representative of the Council, dear colleagues, when the European Union is united, Poland is protected. When the European Union is united, Poland is protected. Throughout the most painful history of this continent, it has been Poland and its brave citizens that have suffered most from European divisions. That's why your attempts, Prime Minister, to threaten the stability and safety of the Union are even more sinister. For years, you have been infecting the mind of Polish people with lies and manipulation about European rules and regulations. Can you tell me which laws exactly you find so reprehensible? Protecting freedom of religion, the right of individuals, or maybe the freedom of press, or the independence of the judiciary? Let me remind you that Poland joined the EU precisely to protect these values. You are not being honest with the Polish people, Prime Minister, and you know it. We have all listened to your denials, but the truth is your actions are a sly way to lead Poland out of the Union. Start being honest and explain to your startups they will lose development funds. Tell your farmers they will miss out on subsidies, and tell your students that they can forget Erasmus. Member States are entitled to want changes in the legal order of the Union, but the way to do this is to propose, to discuss and compromise. This is how our union works. Unilateral illegal actions cannot be accepted and will have consequences. We in Renew Europe call on new President von der Leyen to act immediately on the following. Reject the recovery plan for Poland. Trigger the rule of law conditionality mechanism. No more ifs or buts. Prime Minister, I still hope we can one day walk the path together on the road of cooperation, mutual understanding and respect. But until that moment, you will bear the consequences of your actions and have faced your people when they find out you sold them a lie. And I want to conclude by quoting a wise and brave Polish resistance fighter, Wanda Traczyk-Stawska, who spoke at the pro-European rally 10 days ago. We have always been in Europe. No one will take us out. This is our Europe. And you might learn some lessons from her. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is for the Greens. Skarkala, please, you have the floor.
Dear Prime Minister, I welcome the opportunity to speak to you directly, even though unfortunately I might have missed that hopeful part that you had promised to us. Maybe we should give him the extra time for that, President. I believe, Prime Minister, though, that you are leading your country on a dangerous path. A path which questions the country's well-deserved place at the heart of the European Union. And I remember very well the day that Poland joined the European Union. It was just such a joyful day, such a day full of hope, of overcoming very physical borders, but also the borders in our head. And today it pains me to see how your government undermines this very unity that we celebrated together. Your government has turned its back on the rule of law, on the independence of the judiciary, on minorities, on almost anyone who does not fit your reactionary ideology. And with this latest judgment, your government-chosen judges also turn their back on the very principle of the EU itself, the strength of our common laws. And dear colleagues and dear President von der Leyen, let's make no mistake, this does not just concern Poland. What the Polish government has done and is doing is an attack on the very existence of the EU itself. Our union is not just an economic alignment, it's a union of peace, cooperation, of democracy, and the same rules applying to everyone. A union where members have voluntarily agreed to submit to commonly found agreements in order to offer their citizens a better life, to overcome conflicts and to guarantee peace. And the Polish government has questioned those fundamental pillars. And if we let that pass, then there won't be much left of those pillars before long. This is a test for all of us, but mostly for the European Commission. And President von der Leyen, being the guardian of the treaties has never been an easy task, but this time is different. When a member state blatantly questions the fundamentals, the Commission must act strongly and swiftly. Time and time again, your Commission has extended a hand of dialogue to the Polish government. But President von der Leyen, the Polish government has rejected your hand. It is now high time that you fulfill the obligations that the EU's treaty put on you, to defend citizens of Poland and to defend the core of the Union, a union built on justice. Thank you.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you very much. The next speaker for the Identity and Democracy Group, Nicolas Bay, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President, Madam President, Prime Minister, dear colleagues. Where does legitimacy lie? Who defends liberty? The rule of law, can it be separated from national and popular sovereignty? this learned assembly of commissioners, civil servants and MPs from other countries, are they legitimate to tell a people what its way of life or system of governance should be? Well, that's the question. Those are the questions that bring us here today. 3 years ago, I went to Warsaw as part of an official parliament for our parliament to look at the judicial reform in the country, which we were being referred to as a systemic violation of the rule of law. What I saw, as in Hungary 2 weeks ago, where I was on a similar mission, was that these accusations were baseless. There was nothing to see. They were baseless. We could ask ourselves legitimately about the impartiality of the European institutions, who worry about the primacy of EU law only in certain cases, and we could see the ideological motivations of that. As you said, Prime Minister, similar judgments have also been given in Germany, in Italy, Spain, Romania, even in France, where we have a concept of constitutional identity. Moreover, Brussels doesn't worry about the problem of separation in power in all countries. It's only in certain countries, and always the same countries, and we're seeing growing radicalisation. The Commission and the European left, and we've seen how the EPP are part of the European left, and we've seen the lack of civility from Manfred Weber, are involved in persecuting sovereign governments, and where we have conservative governments who are democratically elected, and that should make a lot of you think about that fact. Now, we have seen a wise decision from the European Council, which has suspended the Article 7 proceedings, and since the organisations on Polish justice have been found to be baseless, they will find other premises, LGBT demands, or the desire to control child sex education. And now the Polish people are being taken hostage by using the post-COVID recovery plan as a way to apply financial pressure. The methods are abhorrent. The aims are also abhorrent. Premier Minister, your adversaries are not looking for the truth. They want to impose on you. They demand forced public confessions in a country which has stood up to totalitarianism twice in the past century. Rule of law is a pretext for a Stalinist trial. We know the real reasons. You are not accepting migration, you're not accepting European federalism, which is trying to creep into all national policies, from education to health, by the family policy and judiciary organisation. But why is there this panic from the federalists? Quite simply, the Polish Constitutional Court has put the EU in its place. It's reminded it that they are made up of, the EU is made up of countries who consent freely to this common project. The powers the EU has are only those which have been delegated to Brussels by the treaties, and that's what they're there for. So there will not be a legal pole exit, there will not be a political pole exit. Prime Minister, Poland is a great European nation. You've been often at the heart of European history, at times for your misfortune, at times for your glory. Many occasions, above all at the siege of Vienna in 1683, the Poles have resisted. You have fought for European civilization. Today, you continue this tradition. You're trying to put an end to the extension of European law, which has been instrumentalized to impose policy that people do not want. Thank you, Prime Minister, for your endurance against these unjustified accusations. Thank you for your determination in defending the freedom of our nations. Thank you for your foresight to defend the values of civilization. Stay strong.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is from the Conservatives group, Richard Anthony Legutko, for the necessary time, please. Thank you.
Mr. President, Madam President, Prime Minister. Prime Minister, from what you have heard so far, you might have already guessed that you found yourself in a most peculiar place. The European the European Parliament is the institution first that has been governed by the same political coalition from time immemorial, rather unusual in any nation state, with predictably unfortunate consequences. Second, the coalition is decidedly left-wing, with the EPP and Donald Tusk follow suit, more and more radical, and tries to enforce their leftist views on the entire world. Recently, believe it or not, on the American state of Texas. Three, it has no understanding for dissent and therefore surrounds the dissenting groups by a cordon sanitaire, which is quite an effective way of neutralizing the opposition. And fourth, it has managed to establish a tyranny of the majority that controls everything from administration to the distribution of the key political position. So once you keep this in mind, you will understand why this parliament has been waging a cold war against and trying to destabilize conservative governments in Europe, and why, to achieve this end, they have been violating the basic principles of the treaties and made up the ad hoc rules that are not there. And in this inglorious task, they have been unfortunately seconded by other institutions, including the European Commission, which, at least since the times of Jean-Claude Juncker and Mr. Timmermans, became a political institution, strongly partisan, ideological, and arrogant. The principles of conferral, subsidiarity, and proportionality explicitly inscribed in the Article 5 were thrown overboard. To give an example, tomorrow there will be another chapter of Poland bashing because of our abortion law. That such matters as abortion are exclusively the competences of the nation state, who cares? The majority can outvote any restraining rule. If making 2 + 2 5 were to hurt the Polish government, they would not hesitate to put it to vote. And you know what? Chances are that they would have it carried. Having got rid of the basic principles of the treaties, they came up with their own rules, which don't exist in the treaties and which the treaties preclude. The first product of their inventive genius came from the Commission, and it was the rule of law framework. And that's then its parliamentary offspring, the rule of conditionality, an absolute outrage, a sheer monstrosity from a legal and moral point of view. So what? Might is right. The newest gizmo is the primacy of the EU law. In various public statements, this phrase has been immersed in a typical EU gobbledygook. But I would like to know what exactly you mean by making this claim, Madam President. There is not a word about it in the treaties. Where did you take it from? If not from the treaties, then where from? And what do you think it means? That the European law trumps the national law in the areas over which the EU has exclusive competences? This is a rather commonsensical statement. Nobody questions it. That the European law trumps the national law in the areas over which the EU does not have any competence? But this is absurd. It would be like the primacy of the European law over the law of the state of Texas. I'm sure that the majority of my colleagues in this chamber would want precisely this, but this does not make it any less absurd. Or perhaps, by primacy, you mean that the European institutions will decide which areas are under their competence and which are not, and the national institutions will have no power to oppose their decision. But this is a very dangerous concept, extremely dangerous, because it gives the EU omnipotence and omniscience it does not have, it cannot have, and to be frank, it does not deserve. Over the last decade, the EU has turned out unable to restrain itself and respect the limits imposed by the principles of conferral, subsidiarity, and proportionality. The trust that it will stay within the treaties in the years to come is gone. You see, Madam President, we are not afraid of European law. We are afraid of European lawlessness, of the tyranny of the majority, of an abuse of power, of the cavalier use of the treaties, despite what one can see in the Parliament and in the Commission. Might is not right.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is from the left group, Martin Sherdon, please.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident.
Thank you very much, President. Ms von der Leyen, at the start of your presidency, you talked about the existing conflicts between Poland and wanting to resolve them in through the course of dialogue. There was an infringement procedure that was in train at the moment, and since then the wheels of justice haven't really rolled anywhere, and we've seen that the conflicts have just got worse and worse. That passivity from the Commission and from you, Ms von der Leyen, has brought us to this situation. Please finally assume your responsibility. The time for fine speeches is over. Please act, and please make sure that the rule of law conditionality mechanism be applied, and stop appeasing the authoritarian powers. Their policy should not be funded by European money. Now, Prime Minister, you have tried to assume the mantle of the right in this House. We can hear from your the applause you got from that part of the chamber. You continue to throw sand in the eyes of the populace, but you're basically continuing to undermine the judiciary and establish political judicial rule. And the rule of law here is what we're talking about today, and this is key, that in Poland we are seeing a fundamental reconstruction in Poland, not just aimed at the judiciary, but also on the observance of fundamental rights. There are no critical words that you found to talk about the LGBTI-free zones, which are illegal in your country, which are being tolerated by you and promoted by you. I think it's outrageous how your country allows women or refuses women to have sexual freedoms of this century, rather than being sent back to chastity belts. Of course, you can't just build a fence to stop things from happening, as you're trying to do with Belarus. You can't build fences to help human rights. So it's not surprising that the Polish authorities have called into question the rule of law. We've heard this in this chamber from many different quarters, but don't be led astray. If one country starts to abuse the rule of law, then many other countries may well follow, and that will be the political end of the European Union. Thank you for your attention.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is from a non-attached member, Milan Urek, please.
Vážená pani predsedníčka.
Madam Chairperson, Prime Minister, I only have 1 minute, so I'm going to call it as it is and politically incorrect. This is a message to liberals. Please stop bullying Central Europe with these made-up mistakes. Hungarians and Poles, whatever they do, you always find some reason to bash them, to punish them, to speak up against them. Let's not be idealistic. The European rule of law that you talk about is nothing else but an alternative tool of control, of pushing a liberal agenda in conservative Central European countries. And on behalf of the conservative citizens of Slovakia, I can say that Poland has our full support when protecting their sovereignty. And I have a message for the liberals in the West. Do not provoke us. Do not provoke Central Europe. Let us get back to the very beginnings of the EU. Economic cooperation, mutual trade, but let us not see an effort to import ideologies that we do not agree with. Thank you.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you very much. And that's the end of the first round of interventions from the political groups. And I showed a degree of flexibility for reasons that everyone will understand. Now we have a long list of speakers, and so I'd have to ask colleagues to respect the times which have been allocated. The first speaker from this next stage is Andrzej Halicki for 1.5 minutes, please.
Szanowni Państwo, Panie...
Ladies and gentlemen, Prime Minister. The language of aggression is not a proof of power, of force. In this room, despite your shouting, we all know that your government has a very thin majority in the Sejm and has no majority in the Senate. And this small majority makes you attack people. But who are you attacking? You are attacking your partners and your friends. And you look for allies not where you should be looking, because these are not Polish friends if you attack Poland from the nationalist position. Because as you said yourself, the safety and security is in community, in safe Europe. Poles decided about it, and Poles will keep deciding about our place in Europe. Because this is the only true sentence you said. We are a proud nation which has its place in Europe. Polish courts should give priority to European norms. Who said that? You said that. You wrote that. This is your book for European law. And it is obvious because Article 91 of Polish Constitution says it clearly. So why are you talking about a conflict here? The ETS is now protecting Polish constitution because you are infringing it. You are infringing the freedom of media, the freedom of expression. Even more, you wrote yesterday to prime ministers and presidents a letter, and you say that you are going to adhere to the verdicts of the ETS and ECJ. I'm sorry. Then I want to ask you: is the disciplinary chamber in Poland, will it be closed? Will you let the judges who have been who cannot work anymore, will you let them work again? Because this is the issue of Polish safety. We will protect Poland in EU because this is not the real face of Poland. You have seen the real face of Poland a week ago during demonstrations. We really care about our common future.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Juan Fernando Lopez Aguilar, please, for 3 minutes.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, President Ursula von der Leyen, Prime Minister. The Polish people who are followers know that it's been the relentless efforts of the European Parliament that has brought this debate to this House time and time again. Your government with Jarosław Kaczynski is in Parliament. You are here, and we represent European citizenship. We represent Polish citizens. We represent the commitment of Poland with the European Union. And the EU is a union of rights and obligations, and and it binds us with the same law. So it's hypocritical to listen to what you say, because your government is one case with that you don't want to comply with ECJ rulings because you say that it's incompatible with EU law. Your government is a unique case when the Prosecutor General is also Minister of Justice, and it's the government that you head up that asks for the Constitutional Court in Poland to declare the primacy of EU law illegitimate. Articles 1, 2, 4 and 19 in the Treaty of the EU are, you say that there's inconstitutionality. You say that the rule of law, independence, the primacy of EU law and the role of the ECJ. That's why we have asked the Commission time and time again to demand a decision for qualified majority from the Council to implement Article 7 procedure. We've asked for conditionality mechanism to be applied so that European funds will not be dispersed until European law is being complied with, that European law which binds all of us. I've also asked for penalties and for infringement proceedings to be put on the Polish government until they comply with European law. I've also asked for EU REACT funds to be frozen for those areas in Poland which have claimed to be LGBT free zones. So that is absolutely incompatible with EU law. And you know what we are doing? We are defending Polish citizens, we're defending European citizens, we're defending Poland in the European Union. That is what we are doing, because we want a Poland which is playing its full role in the EU. We don't want a Poland that is trying to cut away the rules when it feels like it. But you are conveying an absolutely unacceptable message for the future of the EU. This is, we don't have an European Union a la carte. It's European Union on values and rights, and we are all bound to it in the same way.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Guy Verhofstadt for 2.5 minutes, please.
Yes, thank you, President. I have carefully listened to you, Prime Minister, for 30 minutes. For me, even when you have spoken an hour, I would have silently listened to you. But you didn't talk about the ruling of the Constitutional Court. Because the ruling of the Constitutional Court is very clear. Article 1 and Article 19 of the treaty are null and void in Poland, are in contradiction with the Polish constitution. That's the decision of the Constitutional Court in Poland. And that is a constitution, a treaty, Article 1 and Article 19, that you have accepted in 2004. That the peace government has accepted at the moment of the Lisbon Treaty. And these Article 1 and Article 19, you know what it is. Article 1 is an ever closer union. And Article 19 is the central role of the European Court of Justice. By the way, it's exactly for the same reasons that the hard Brexiteers went out of the European Union. For these two articles, Article 1 and 19. So, the sinister game that you are playing is very clear. The sinister game is that you are putting a politicized Constitutional Court inside Poland. And that politicized Constitutional Court is criticized by whom? By the European Court of Justice. So the way to eliminate the decisions of the European Court of Justice is to take with the politicized Constitutional Court of Poland a decision that the ECJ has no longer a right of decision in Poland. That is what you have done. And what you have done, and what you defend here, because you are making references to others, to the French and the Germans, and there is something to say about the German Constitutional Court and so on. But they never did that. They never said that Article 1 and Article 19 is not longer applicable in Poland, in their country. They never did that. Like I said, the Brexiteers did that. So what you have done is in fact putting an existential threat to your country, and most of all to the people, to the Polish people, who are the most pro-European people of the entire European Union. That is what you have done. And that remembers me something very dramatic in European history. By the end of the 18th century, when a great country like Poland disappeared, a fatal mix of bad governance, of external threats, and the betrayal of conservatives who could not accept a modern Polish constitution at that time. Well, I am the only one who sees some fatal resemblance here by what is happening today in Poland. So, I have to tell you, I know that you are a historian. I know that you are a historian, Prime Minister. So I wanted, in fact, to start my speech and to end my speech with a classic historical book, The March of the Follies of Barbara Tuchman, because it remembers me what is happening in Poland today. It starts with a simple decision, and it goes in another decision and a further decision, and that is when the folly starts. It's in fact not people who want that, not the ordinary Polish citizens, it's the ego of big power players who are not thinking what will be the disaster at the end of the story. So my wish, Prime Minister, is please come back to these stupid decisions and end, together with the Polish people, this march of the folly that you have entered in 2015.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. The next speaker is Terry Ranke, please. 2 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, dear Prime Minister, dear colleagues, dear Commission President. Mr. Morawiecki, despite of what you have been saying today, I must admit that I have to ask myself the question, after what happened in Poland in the last weeks and months, whether on the 7th of October, when this ruling was proclaimed by the Constitutional Tribunal, you actually did not secretly open a bottle of champagne together with Vladimir Putin. Because seriously, when I look at the situation, political vision and political agenda, I see a lot of similarities between Putin and what your government is doing. What you are trying to do is to convert Poland into an authoritarian state with weak democratic institutions and a weak enforcement of fundamental rights of its citizens. And you seem to be sharing another political aim with Vladimir Putin, and that is a weak and disunited European Union. But let me break it to you. The majority of the Polish citizens disagrees with you. The majority of the Polish citizens, and they have shown that beautifully last weekend, they want to live in a strong Poland, in a strong European Union based on rule of law, fundamental rights and democracy, and we salute these people in Poland. And it shouldn't be here in the European Parliament that this is addressed to you. It should be you, Mr. Prime Minister, who speaks to your citizens, who speaks to your judges, some of them are here on the tribune today, to your prosecutors, to your civil society organization. Speak to them and listen to them. They want to live in a country based on rule of law, with an independence of the judiciary, with separation of powers and with fundamental rights. And I must say, I find it unbearably painful sometimes to say so many obvious things again and again in these debates. But yes, obviously, Polish citizens are EU citizens and they are protected by EU law. And it is not a nice to have for the European Commission to protect their rights. It is the duty of the European Commission to protect their rights. And lastly, I would like to say one thing, because I think this has been confused a lot in this debate. There is no conflict, there is no disagreement between the Polish constitution and the EU treaties on the subject matter that we are debating, on rule of law, on separation of power, or the independence of the judiciary. They are completely in line there. So please, Mr. Prime Minister, bring Poland back on a path to rule of law, implement the ECJ rulings as demanded, and do what your citizens demand you to bring Poland back really to the heart of Europe. Thank you very much.
Danke, Frau Kollegin.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Maximilian Krah.
Herr Präsident, liebe Kollegen, Herr Premierminister, Sie haben...
President, colleagues, Prime Minister, you've given us a very legal presentation of the limitations of European law and the demarcation line with national sovereignty. Nobody disputes the precedence of the European law in certain circumstances, but it's not able to decide the parameters of its own powers itself. It's the constitutional courts of the member states which define that, Mr. Weber. And therefore the Polish Constitutional Court is entitled to decide that its judicial system is not subject to European law. If you wish to contest this, fair enough, but you can't argue that the European Union can define its own competences. If you don't want national states to be sovereign, if you want a superstate in Europe, then you're asking for the European Court of Justice to decide what the competences of the European Union and what are not. But this is not the Europe of the treaties. This is not the Europe which the people of Europe actually want, neither in Poland nor anywhere else, for that matter. And therefore, I say to you, Poland saved us in the Battle of Vienna. Let us uphold the sovereignty of the member states and let us renew our pledge to that. Thank you.
Ich ersuche Frau Raffaele.
Mr. Raffaele Fito.
Presidente della Commissione.
President, Prime Minister, President of the Commission, it is a great pleasure for me to have an opportunity to participate in this debate to support the reasoning of the Polish government. We are participating in what is a surreal debate, to my mind, in this Parliament. This is the 15th or even the 20th time we've been discussing Poland, and we constantly come back to these issues in the European Parliament. It is obsessed with Poland, effectively. I'm not going to rehearse all the arguments which have been aired previously and comments that have been made about other countries' constitutional courts and rulings and about the lack of equity across the European institutions. Here, this is a political debate par excellence, and it's a political debate very clearly, which shows that there are those who are reluctant to compare the current constitutional court's position with previous decisions by previous courts. But the reality is that in a number of other countries, clear decisions have been made which call into question the supremacy of community law by constitutional courts. Let's listen to what people have been saying here this morning. We're all politicians. Let us be aware of the fact that at the beginning of an electoral campaign, of course, a European institution is intent on changing the course of Polish politics and is weaponizing the structure of the judiciary in Poland to suit its own ends. But it would actually be much more appropriate to be discussing other things. People are talking constantly here about Putin and Russia, and 6 times in the Conference of Presidents we have asked, for example, to have Nord Stream 2 on the agenda for a debate in Parliament. So it's quite clear that the agenda is simply fixed according to the powers that be's preferences and what is suitable for debate on the floor of the House and what's not. But this is an own goal by the European institutions which are seeking to weaponize European issues in order to attack a perfectly legitimately elected government. Thank you.
Der nächste Redner ist Herr.
The next speaker is Constantino Sarvanitas for 1 minute.
Good afternoon, Mr. President, Ms. von der Leyen. Our inactivity of the European Commission has led to where we are today. We bear a responsibility, but now we have a show by alt-right through a Prime Minister, and this is an ideological rift that we witness here in the European Parliament. But why did we build the European Union? Let's start from scratch. The concepts of human rights and the rule of law cannot fall prey to bespoke interpretations to serve interests of certain governments, Mr. Prime Minister. This ruling was a decision ordered by the Polish government to affirm their own ideological obsessions impinging on citizens' rights. Your tool is your constitutional court. One thing is not negotiable for us, for the Democrats, for the left: rule of law and human rights. On all other issues, be it economic policy, green transition, we can talk. But when it comes to human rights and the right of each woman to manage her body, for the right of self-identification, self-determination, this is a right that is not negotiable. Poland must remain in Europe. It deserves Europe, but not with the values of the alt-right. Thank you.
Herr Kollege Tamás Deutsch.
Mr. Tamás Deutsch, you're the next speaker. You also have 1 minute.
I'm Polish today. Przyjrzyjmy się, kto dzisiaj uczy Polaków i Węgrów europejskich wartości i praworządności.
Who is teaching Poles and Hungarians European values today?
Papírfesztékre írogatott befolyási övezet százalékokkal dobott oda minket a szovjet birodalomnak, amelyik elit képviselői véreskezű diktátorokkal, Jaruzelszkivel és Kádárral paroláztak.
So the elites of the West have thrown us into the Soviet Union, where they discussed with other autocrats and dictators like Gaddafi, while we are fighting against the dictatorships, and we've been fighting for our independence. So we can see what they're capable of today. Fourth wave of COVID, an unprecedented wave of immigrants, and still trying to beat down the fair points that the Hungarians are raising. We will protect our own independence regardless of what you do.
Nice.
Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Esteban González Pons has the floor.
Mr. Morawiecki, during your speech, I was not sure if I was listening to you or to Nigel Farage. If you are going to talk about justice and rule of law, at least be honest with us. The truth is, not a single court in Europe has challenged the supremacy of the treaties. Only your government and the Constitutional Court appointed by your party. You can question the law and the competences, but if you question the supremacy of the treaties, you are questioning the whole European foundation. And let me be clear, this is a road to exit. There is no room for alternative solutions. In other words, what you are proposing here and today is a constitutional Brexit. Your vision of Poland is driven by fear, but you are not scared about losing Polish identity. You are only scared about losing your self-power. Mr. Morawiecki, the vision of Poland that the Polish people have is made by hope and dreams. Poland was already a great European nation before you, and it will continue being a great European nation after you and your party, because you know, for the Polish people, Europe and freedom mean the same.
Danke, Herr Kollege.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pons. Now, Mr. Marek Belka has the floor.
Pani Przewodnicząca, Panie Premierze.
President, Prime Minister, let me be clear. I am feeling ashamed time and time again. We have to talk about Poland due to your actions. Why is it you present here today explaining your lies to us here in this chamber? But It is Minister Jobro, the Minister of Justice, who's responsible for this. And you said recently that the European Union is implementing a policy of a diktat by EU officials. But the only diktat in Poland is by Jarosław Kaczyński. You talked about European values, Prime Minister. What do you know about values if you divide Polish citizens into different categories and you take EU flags out of official buildings in Poland? When people took to the streets in order to protest against your decisions, why did you allow groups of far-right organizations to shout over such peaceful protests? So, Prime Minister, we are at the crossroads now, a crossroads of EU or European history, for that matter. That was actually the only true element in your statement. The history of EU will be written farther on with Poland or without Poland. And you seem to be doing all you can to exclude us, Poland, from this process. President von der Leyen, the speech by Prime Minister Morawiecki is a sequence of lies and half-truths. We are used to this in Poland, but you, President, and the Commission, you must not get used to it. This time is now over. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear colleague. Am Wort ist
now Mr. Szymaczka.
Thank you very much, Madam President, Mr. Prime Minister. First of all, I think it's good to be brutally honest about why we're having this debate, because the ruling of the Polish Constitutional Tribunal is not a product of some grand legal or philosophical dispute over competencies, or democracy or constitutionalism, nor is it meant to protect the treaty as the Prime Minister would have us believe. The reality, unfortunately, is much simpler. Your government, your party, wanted to centralize power, to take control over independent judiciary in Poland, and the European Court of Justice stood in the way. It became an obstacle. So you had the Constitutional Tribunal remove the obstacle and clear the way. And it is as simple as that. The problem, of course, is that if every member state government acted in this way, with such contempt for common rules, with such disregard for how it affects others in the community, there would be no European Union. Take my country, Slovakia, which is also grappling with reforming a post-communist judiciary and rooting out corruption. But for us to succeed, we critically rely on the integrity of rule of law in the EU. But now, one of our closest partners in Central Europe, a nation whose bravery we admire so much, a nation whose leadership in Europe we so desperately need, now that partner has decided to throw everything in doubt, to risk everything. And by everything, of course, I mean the EU's legal order, the authority of the ECJ, protection of citizens' rights, the single market, basically the integration story of the past decades. This is precisely why the European Parliament, why this House insists on the suspension of money from the Recovery and Resilience Funds. This is precisely why the Commission and the Council must finally act after years and years of dialogue which brought no results. It is not to punish Poland. It is not to intimidate Poland. It is not to blackmail Poland. It is to protect our own values, to protect the European project. And while, Mr. Prime Minister, you may no longer care about its future, but the rest of us, the majority of citizens, in fact, Poles and Slovaks and others, we still very much do. Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. Now, Ms. Sylvia Spurek has the floor.
Panie premierze, Prime Minister, if I would want to joke, I would congratulate you, because your government has a Guinness World Record. I don't think In any other case, the Parliament had to deal with Poland, with any other country as it deals with Poland. And Polish problems, the judiciary, the LGBTI, women's rights, media freedom. But we cannot joke here. You should use your energy, but for Poland, to cooperate with the EU when it comes to the solutions which would make sure that women in Polish villages can access a doctor, a gynecologist, that people who are disabled can have normal life. Poland does not have to go the road you took. Poland can still be seen as the country which works for democracy, human rights and our common values. We do not want Poland to be a symbol of breaking the law, of divisions and hatred.
Danke.
Thank you. Mr. Gerolf Annemans, the lectern is free for you.
Colleagues, thank you. I would like to address myself particularly today to the European majority who think that the European Union's management should be centralised in Brussels and that the powers of the European Union will determine everything, that the rulings of the Court of Justice are sacrosanct and that we operate in a closed legal system where these rulings hold sway, that the powers of the European Union, indeed the court, can be expanded, and that is the way we're going to the future. And countries which may actually dispute this will simply have sanctions imposed, financial sanctions. It seems that all too many people think that in Lisbon, the decisions that were taken then determine for time immemorial how the EU will operate, and there will be no change of regime in any country. But let me say to you, colleagues, that the world is changing and that countries are changing, and the error of your ways is becoming ever more clear. It's time you realized the error of your ways. 50 million Europeans decided that they would like to take back their sovereignty. And it is time that you realize that the citizens in the entirety of Europe are not happy with contracting out their sovereignty entirely to the EU and its institutions. Angela Merkel was in Brussels recently and was asked questions last week on her valedictory visit when she came inter alia to our government, and she said in German,
Merkel speaking, aber zu glauben,
that to believe that political differences and even differences of perception of the European Union and how it should work and what its priorities should be can only be resolved through legal and court procedures, I find to be incorrect. We therefore have major problems, but I would urge that they be resolved through conversation, discussion and compromise. This has always been the way of the European Union and should remain so henceforth. Thank you.
Herr Robert Roos.
Mr. Robert Roos, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Prime Minister, Madam President, honourable members. Today we are discussing a Polish court decision saying in cases where the EU has no competence, Polish law applies. This should not be controversial. Last year the German Constitutional Court came to similar conclusions. The truly controversial decision was made in Luxembourg. European judges interfering in the organisation of Polish justice system, which clearly falls outside the authority of the European treaties. And you, colleagues, always choose European institutions over national authorities, out of a misguided sense of pro-European sympathy. Dear colleagues, the true European should accept the division of powers between Member States and Brussels. The true European should accept that the European is not a superstate, but an alliance of sovereign nation states. And the true European should accept our unity in diversity. Today should have been a lesson in humility and democracy, not an encouragement to continue this undemocratic attack on the Polish member state. Thank you very much.
Frau Sira Rego.
The next speaker is Ms. Sira Rego, if you'd like to come to the podium.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you, President. The Polish judiciary is rebelling. They won't accept the European legal order, but they don't do so to protect their workers, the lowest paid in the EU, or to do away with decades of austerity affecting pensions, healthcare, education and salaries in general. It's being done to further your plan for authoritarianism. In a few weeks it will be a year since abortion was made illegal, to which we must add the harassment of the LGBTI community, restrictions on the free press, the racist anti-migrant discourse, the controlled judiciary. The Polish government wants to be free to violate human rights, but wants everyone to share the bill. In essence, this is not a question of sovereignty. This is a declaration of war on rights, and there are no doubts. The defence of human rights is something which all must commit to, wherever we are. They need to be met in Poland, and it's something that we will commit to continue building a Europe which is of Europe of equals.
Herr Kollege Miroslav.
Thank you. And the next speaker is Mr. Miroslav Radogowski.
Vážení kolegovia.
Dear colleagues, every month, every week, every day, we keep listening to Poland, Poland, Poland. It's the same topic all over again. What is it that Poland has done to you? I have the German constitutional ruling from Karlsruhe, and I also have the ruling of the Polish Constitutional Tribunal. From the legal perspective, there is no problem with them. However, it seems that Poland cannot afford the same as German Constitutional Court can. It's not a legal problem. This is the problem of seeing the primacy of the EU law over national law, and we need a dialogue. There is no other way. We need to have a dialogue, otherwise we will have a parallel European Unions, and Madame von der Leyen will be a queen. We will need to have a political elite deciding on matters in member states. As regards Poland, and I will speak in Polish now.
Suwerennym państwem narodowym.
Poland must be a sovereign state. Poland must and will be in Poland, and I am Polish.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Tomasz Tobey.
Thank you, President von der Leyen, Prime Minister. Yes, Europe is united in diversity. And yes, sometimes we have different views. But we have common ground rules, and not at least we have rule of law. The verdict of Poland's Constitutional Tribunal, but also, I must say, Prime Minister, your speech today is not only worrying, it is, frankly speaking, unacceptable, and it is dramatic for Poland and for Europe. And I must sincerely ask you, Prime Minister, why are you pushing for this short-term adverse political strategy of the Peace Party? Why is the small majority that your current government have more important than the Polish people? Don't you take any responsibility for opening the door to take your country out of the European Union? Be honest with what you are doing. This is a political strategy, and you need to take some responsibility for what we are seeing right now. We need to keep Europe together, and we need to keep a strong Poland in the European Union. Please, please respect rule of law and come back to Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is the Vice President of the Parliament, Catalina Barley.
Danke, Herr Präsident, Frau Präsidentin.
Thank you, President.
People's Chamber. to the heart of European democracy that we fight hard for. And the independence of the judiciary has to be an essential part of every member state. It's the European Court of Justice who said that, not in a Polish case, in a Portuguese case. Why do I stress that? Because you keeping up this double standard narrative. It's just not true. The Polish justice minister wants to sue Germany now because of our election procedure of justice. Just go ahead. You have a very good example of the independence of the judiciary in Germany with the German court ruling that you mentioned. The decision by the German Court of Justice, the Constitutional Court, is a good example. It ruled against the government, which heavily fought for a different outcome. In the Polish case, you see the opposite. You see the Polish government asking for a decision and the Constitutional Court delivering it. We've seen that also with Ordo Juris when it came to the abortion law. The Polish Constitutional Court was designed and organized to serve the government, not to control it. And that is the difference. In its judgment, the German Constitutional Court stressed the primacy of EU law explicitly. It has never declared parts of the European treaties unconstitutional. No constitutional court has ever done that. And how can you say that others get away with it and Poland doesn't? Germany is facing an infringement procedure for this Constitutional Court ruling, and rightfully so. If the Commission takes action in the German case, of course it has to. In the Polish, that is in so many ways more severe. It is not the EU applying double standards. It is the Polish government acting like no other. You're trying to redefine democratic values in a way that you get rid of any sort of control, what Democrats call separation of powers. And that is against the treaties, and so now you want to get rid of the treaties too. And that is anti-democratic. The Polish people deserve our greatest respect. They have contributed so much to the fall of the Iron Curtain and are an important part of this European Union, and they want to be part of it by a vast majority. Let's make it clear, it is the Polish government who is putting their European future at risk and nobody else. Thank you.
Danke.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker is Ms. Innefeld.
Thank you, President. The rule of law crisis is the single biggest threat to the European Union, and disintegration has already set in today. And yet the European Council flatly refuses to tackle the matter, which is unsurprising, as the main offenders are actually sitting on that same European Council. And even today, government leaders irresponsibly prefer to appease the autocrats, keeping the matter off the agenda. President von der Leyen, you are concerned, but you haven't announced any action. The Commission has a duty to protect the treaties, and this House has a duty to hold the Commission to account. And we expect the Commission to do whatever it takes to halt the destruction of the rule of law. Anything less would amount to the dereliction of duty, and that would merit the ultimate political consequence. Because debates, resolutions demanding action sound hollow, without consequences. Consequences for autocrats, but also for the enablers of autocrats. So, colleagues, we speak firm language today, but are we ready to go beyond words if necessary? Thank you.
Thank you. Madame Diana Riba.
The next speaker is Ms. Riba Iguiner.
Gracias, President.
Thank you. Prime Minister, you have crossed a red line. The final challenge from Poland to the EU institutions is another attack which is unacceptable on the rule of law in Europe. President von der Leyen, we need to react given the illiberal democracy which has been growing in democracy. That's why today I'd like to invite you to look at ourselves. In Europe, we have imprisoned those who have organised referendum. We do not allow the right for asylum. There are certain MEPs who can act in all European countries apart from at home. We have seen journalists be murdered, and many other problems. This is all happening in the EU. Let's leave double standards to one side. We need a control mechanism to protect the rule of law, which is effective for all member states. The seeds of authoritarianism are growing, and they are undermining the foundation of Europe. Being European today means we have to